My starting hypothesis is that good ideas always do travel. Good ideas always travel. That's the Scott theory. So if you think that social media could stop a good idea, I would say you're going to need some examples. Because there may be things that got slowed down a little bit, but I don't think you can stop a good idea. I tell you, engineers are the most underappreciated skill. Somebody says, yay, us engineers. Engineers are the superstars of civilization. You know, scientists get all the credit, right? Because they do the sexy discoveries, and you can have scientists who are famous. You don't have as many famous engineers. But engineers are the ones who build society. They take the science stuff and make it work. So if the only thing keeping us from solving this is engineering, we're in good shape. That's the problem you want. The problem you want is the one where you've got all the money in the world to solve it, because we would, just open the wallet for anything that worked. All the money in the world, all the attention, focus, priority in the world, and the only thing you need is engineering. That's good news. That's the best news you'll ever hear. So I asked a provocative question on Twitter, and I'm watching the answers come in. And this is sort of a head scratcher, sort of a thinker. You have to think about this one for a while, because your first instinct will be different than what you arrive at. And it goes like this. We all know and take it as a given, as do I, that conservative voices are somewhat throttled or suppressed on social media. You all agree on that part, right? There's no disagreement on the premise of the question that conservative voices tend to be throttled and suppressed on social media. Right? I think we're all on that page. But here's the question. What would be an example of some good idea that got suppressed? In other words, if the idea of free speech is that some of it is valuable. Lots of it is not. That's the nature of human beings. A lot of what we say has no use, or is wrong, or is misleading, or it's, evil intentions. But you don't want to ban speech because some of it is so important. And yet on social media, we're all aware that conservatives get a little throttled or sometimes outright banned. And the question is, what would be some idea or fact that we didn't get to hear because of that? Now, your first instinct will be, well, if they're banning people, obviously they're suppressing ideas because those ideas come with the people. It's the people who have the ideas. But what would be an example? Because every time you come up with an example, the reason that you have the example is because you heard of it, right? Somebody said, what about nuclear energy as being a good idea? Well, you know it. How come you know it? I know it. How do we know it? We all learned it on social media, probably. Mark Schneider, very active on social media. Nobody's suppressing him. Or let me put it this way. I don't know if his tweets are as visible as anybody else's, but do you know any conservative who is not aware that nuclear energy is a good solution? I don't. I've never even heard of one. The efficacy of vaccines. Efficacy? Well, you're talking about the danger of them, aren't you? Or are you really talking about efficacy? Anyway, the point is, if you can list something that you think was suppressed, was it suppressed? Was it? Right? Because if you know about it and other conservatives know about it, was it suppressed? Here's the theory that I'm working on. That you can't suppress good ideas in the long run. Now, I'm not saying that the situation as it stands is good. I would like to see it fixed too. Now I see people mentioning specific people, but let me be very specific. My question is not about people. It's not about people. I acknowledge that individuals are getting banned, and so those individuals have less options for free speech. But if you were to take all of those individuals, what idea is it that they're promoting that you've not actually heard? Now, of course, it's, as someone pointed out, it's a trick question. It's sort of a trick question. Because if you've heard of it, well, how banned was it? It wasn't very banned if you've heard about it. And if you haven't heard about it, how would you be able to list it? So there might be something that you've never heard of that's been banned, but how would you know? So here's, if you think that I'm going for a specific outcome, I'm not really. It's just an interesting thing to think about. And my starting hypothesis is that good ideas always do travel. Good ideas always travel. That's the Scott theory. So if you think that social media could stop a good idea, I would say you're going to need some examples. Because there may be things that got slowed down a little bit, but I don't think you can stop a good idea. Think about all the ideas that I've suggested on social media. A lot of them, right? If you've been watching me for a while, it's mostly what I do. I talk about this new idea or that new idea. And much of it is, if not most, is in some way directly or indirectly good for President Trump. So how throttled am I? If I have an idea, can I get my idea to the people who I want to? I think I can. I believe that all of my ideas can go wherever I want them. Can you think of anything I've ever suggested that got throttled on social media? Now, the best example that I saw in the comments was asking the questions is the Find People hoax. Now, the Find People hoax is 100%, no, that's not true. I'd say among conservatives, maybe, what would you say? I'd be looking for your opinion on this. Maybe half of conservatives know that that's a hoax because it was so widely reported as true that even Republicans probably didn't know it was a hoax until some of us started hammering on that. So for the past, 3 years, you've watched me, Steve Cortez, Joel Pollack, among others, debunking the Find People hoax. The articles all get published. When Steve Cortez does a PragerU video about it, I think he got 6 million views. When I don't know how many views Breitbart gets, but they're publishing the stories. I'm tweeting them. You see my tweets. I have, let's see, let me check my number of users. I have 435,000 users. And this week the president retweeted me 4 times. The president of the United States. So how shadow banned am I if the president of the United States is retweeting me 4 times this week? Not very much, right? Now you could argue that some of my tweets were less visible, and that's probably true. You know, the algorithm was biasing against me. Maybe I should have 1 million followers by now instead of 435,000. But ask yourself this. What good idea have I ever had that didn't get where it needed to go? So I think we make the mistake of thinking that the person is the idea, and they're really not. You know, there are lots of good arguments against banning people from social media. And by the way, I think you're going to see some changes to that. Let me give you a little prediction. I think that you will see some kind of, in the future, a social media court that can listen to appeals and say, okay, you know, you probably got banned for a good reason. You did break the law. I mean, you broke the guidelines. So they banned you for a good reason. But, you know, 5 years is long enough, or whatever it's been. Or let's try it again. You can go back, but we'll keep an eye on you. So I think social media is going to have to develop some kind of an appeals process, because I think they recognize that otherwise they get accused of being a monopoly. We don't really mind monopolies when they do good things. We don't mind monopolies when they're good. It's just when they're abusive. So we don't mind the social media giving us these great tools, so long as if somebody gets badly treated, there's some recourse. So I think that social media companies will have to build some kind of recourse to keep the pressure off them for being monopolies, or virtual monopolies. So I didn't notice until this morning that apparently Ivanka Trump had retweeted one of my tweets from 2 weeks ago, in which I had said that the coming 2 weeks, we're sort of at the end of it now, that there would be immense breakthroughs and creative inventions and entrepreneurial breakthroughs, and it would be breathtaking. Did that happen? Do we have breathtaking news of new advancements? I would say yes. We don't know which ones will actually move the needle, but man, there's a lot of advancements. Here's some fun ones. Apparently, antibodies are not created equal, according to Dr. Sanjay Gupta, that you might have weak antibodies or you might have strong antibodies. It could vary by person. But if you find somebody who had really good antibodies, somebody who just whacked the coronavirus with their own body without any help, you can find the good ones, and you can take them out, and you can put them in the test tube, and you can see how quickly it kills the viruses. So you can test very specifically whether your antibodies or mine are the good ones. And then you take the good ones, and then there's this process called monoclonal antibodies, where they can clone the best antibodies. So you find who has strong ones, you clone them. What's the problem with that? The problem is that it's expensive. But how much would rich people pay to get super antibodies? A lot. So usually the way you solve things that are too expensive is you sell it to rich people first, overcharge them because they're willing to pay. We used to call this the dumb rich, the stupid rich category, because they'll overpay for stuff. In business, we call them the dumb rich. And the dumb rich will buy it, and then it can drive down the price for people who follow. I would overpay for monoclonal antibodies. So if you could give me some really, really good antibodies tomorrow, I'd pay a lot for that. And if I have to overpay, because I can afford it at the moment, if that brings down the price for other people, suppose you told me I had to pay twice as much so I could fund somebody else to get it too. I might do that. Well, I definitely would do that. So there may be a way that this monoclonal antibodies could be like the magic bullet, but there could be some issue with scaling it up. I don't know what that is. But it sounds like an engineering problem, doesn't it? Here's a little advice for you. If you're trying to predict the future, and you've got scientists saying, hey, I think we can do this, versus an engineer saying, hey, I think we can do this, which one is reliable? The scientist who said, yeah, I got a good feeling this will work, or the engineer who just has to build something with known technology? Always bet on the engineer. So if it turns out that these monoclonal antibodies are a big deal, probably the problem is making enough of it inexpensively. That feels like an engineering problem, not a science problem, right? If it's an engineering problem, you could be amazed how quickly and efficiently that gets solved. Because I don't think anybody is really working on it up till now, because there hasn't been a big need for it. But if we need these monoclonal antibodies, and the only thing preventing us from having enough is engineering, I tell you, engineers are the most underappreciated skill. Somebody says, yay, us engineers. Engineers are the superstars of civilization. Scientists get all the credit, right, because they do the sexy discoveries, and you can have scientists who are famous. You don't have as many famous engineers. But engineers are the ones who build society. They take the science stuff and make it work. So if the only thing keeping us from solving this is engineering, we're in good shape. That's the problem you want. The problem you want is the one where you've got all the money in the world to solve it, because we would, just open the wallet for anything that worked. All the money in the world, all the attention, focus, priority in the world, and the only thing you need is engineering. That's good news. That's the best news you'll ever hear. Because if it's down to the engineers, you win. Because the engineers know how to do engineering. They know how to do this stuff. All right, so that's good news. Here's some more good news. I had told you, some of you might remember, that after 9/11, the government challenged its laboratories to find a quick way to, quickly, inexpensively test biological agents in the field. So the task was to create something portable, inexpensive, that you can make a lot of them, and you could easily test if there was some suspicion of biological warfare or anthrax or something, you could just quickly test people in the field. Now, the technology that was developed to do that is licensable to private companies, because when the government invents something, they make those licenses available so that they don't have a monopoly on it. And I'd seen a bunch of startups that were using that very technology, and this was a few years ago. So I can imagine how much how much better it is now. So here's the news that DARPA, the U.S.'s most advanced military agency, has designed a coronavirus test that can identify people before they become infectious. Before they become infectious. And I think it's a quick test as well. And it's described as a potential game changer. Of course, we say that about everything that sounds good. And it came from a project at the Defense Advanced Research Project, DARPA, that was initially designed for diagnosing those who had become poisoned by germ or chemical warfare. I think that's what I was talking about. I think this is the technology that came out of the 9/11 and the anthrax worries, etc. It's the one I was waiting for. And I assumed that some of the startups that are doing stuff were using that technology, but and it was repurposed for the coronavirus, blah, blah, blah. So it may be able to detect the presence of the virus in as little as 24 hours after a person is infected. Unbelievable. Who makes these devices? Engineers. Engineers. Right? We have a problem that is completely susceptible to engineering. And it has now been reduced to an engineering problem. If you're going to bet on humans and say, okay, humans, you're having a war with this virus. If the humans' best fighters are the scientists, you don't know, right? Scientists might invent something in time, they might not. But once you've moved the fight over to the engineers versus virus, it's over. It's over. The engineers are going to crush the virus. Might take a little time, but it's guaranteed. Once the engineers are the main fighters, it's guaranteed.